4 states have begun early voting. By next month, most people will have an option to vote early. That means most people in the whole country, by mail or in person. And the policy of actually enabling early voting dates all the way back to the mid-1800s. You can see soldiers lining up to cast ballots there before the 1864 midterms. The Library of Congress has this illustration of the earliest early vote from an illustration in Harper's. So all the way back before women or minorities had voting rights in the United States, early voting was already available for some, a way to ensure soldiers could exercise their rights when they might have been occupied or just not available to participate on Election Day.
Absentee voting goes back a long way in our country. We first began absentee voting in the Civil War. It was a provision put in place for military voters who were going to be away from home, a significant force in the 1864 election.
That option continued for soldiers overseas. It established that votes could be reliably cast early, could be safeguarded and counted on Election Day with all of those other votes. Now, political junkies might even remember how soldiers' mail-in votes became one of the footnotes in the very controversial and much debated Bush-Gore election recount battle back in 2000.
A Bush campaign appeal to get those military ballots with overseas problems, with those postmark problems, included in the vote totals.
Governor Bush anxiously awaits the decision on those disputed military ballots from overseas.
I would give the benefit of the doubt to ballots coming in from military personnel.
Voting by mail ultimately went from that carve-out for active duty military members to something more. Because when a system works, it often expands. In 2000, Oregon became the first state to go all vote by mail for presidential races. Today, most states offer mail voting, and that's by definition earlier than Election Day. You mail it in, as well as early voting in person. You can see the options on the map. America's shifting from a day to what I'm calling election month, even if we haven't all updated the lingo. And let me show you, across most of the 1900s through 1992, basically only 7% of people had early voting options. There you see it in 92. That means over 90% still voted on Election Day. Then early voting rates more than doubled by 2000 to around 16%, you can see, and then all the way up by 2016 to over a third of voters doing so early. The last cycle became the majority for the first time. 64% of the 154 million total votes came in early by mail. That shift had already begun, as you see, before 2020, but the COVID lockdown supersized it. And while people had all kinds of reasons to vote in 2020, making it easier over a long period of time certainly helped. The 2020 election had the largest increase in voting between presidential elections ever in history, the largest spike. And now, over half of voters say they still plan to vote early, and that's without the COVID factor this cycle. So, election month is one of the factors that may increase ongoing voter turnout. And while high participation can be just a neutral, nonpartisan sign of healthy civic life, it's not that simple, or at least that positive. I bet you already know this because you're watching the news, but in today's America, high turnout is not something that all politicians welcome equally. High turnout has driven Democratic victories. The Obama coalition famously trounced Republicans and flipped many states with high turnout. The Harris campaign sees high turnout as supersizing her odds of winning. And remember, more people have voted for the Democrat for the White House in 7 of the last 8 races, even when the Electoral College picked a different winner in the first elections for Trump and George W. Bush. A reminder that the nation actually consistently tips blue, and even more blue when turnout is high. So now that it's election month around the nation, Democrats may have an edge if it juices turnout, and the GOP sees that as a problem. And this is a party that's already fought harder in the past decades to limit or suppress voting, with crackdowns targeting minorities or Democratic-leaning groups like young voters and pushing blatant hurdles that make it harder to vote, from controversial voter ID requirements to purges of election rolls. And some Republicans admit the goal of depressing turnout is what they want to do to help their odds in races they might otherwise lose. They even admit high levels of voting can mean Republicans lose elections.
They had things, levels of voting that if you ever agreed to it, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again.
Their bill would make Election Day a new paid holiday for government workers. A power grab that's smelling more and more like exactly what it is.
That is what the anti-voting agenda sounds like. And just to be clear, I give you the evidence, but I also give you, when necessary, when warranted, the obvious values or assessment along with it. This is not how healthy parties respond to voter feedback like those national elections I've shown you here. Healthy political parties try to develop ideas, platforms, and policies that respond to voters, and might win voters back against results like this. They don't try to just distort or suppress who participates in elections. And that's key for understanding the anti-democracy extremism of today's Republican Party. This started long before Trump, so it may outlast him. And I want to be clear, some of these efforts are legal, meaning they don't break the law. They've used the law to erect hurdles or voter ID requirements, which might be unfair, but which are not illegal or criminal. Courts have upheld them. Republicans view those hurdles and ploys as a way to try to win elections they might otherwise lose if everyone participated. And that is the context for their concern about election week and election month and early voting. Donald Trump had a sense that all this would hurt him more than help him. He tried to trash early voting as a general matter, openly admitting the reasoning. He wasn't saying this was a policy thing or he was thinking about whether soldiers would be able to vote or any of those high-minded considerations I mentioned. No, he just thought he might lose if everyone participated, like the sound I just played for you. He also tried to abuse federal power to quite literally interfere with how the U.S. Postal Service would deliver these ballots by mail and blocking funding. Trump also just lied about it and decried early voting as somehow corrupt. Donald Trump was clearly thinking about sabotaging the early vote in general, and that failed. And if it's become very common, well, you know the saying, if you can't beat them, join them. Republicans have begun trying to override Donald Trump's attacks by urging the party to catch up. I showed you J.D. Vance earlier along those lines, and others have said it as well, pleading with the party to compete in new terrain, because if literally tens or hundreds of millions of people are now voting early, trashing it only in right-wing MAGA super red circles is not going to even the playing field, and you clearly failed to dissuade everyone from exercising the right to early vote. So we're hearing more from Republicans, even in MAGA circles, about banking ballots early because lots of people vote in election month.
If we don't bank ballots early, we're going to keep losing.
But we didn't.
But we didn't.
But we didn't do it in 2020 because everyone said don't vote early because that's corrupt.
Not everyone.
Well,
yes,
a lot of people did at the very top of the Republican Party.
Yes,
you didn't.
People did.
A lot of people did at the top of the Republican Party. Who could she be speaking about? Donald Trump, who played himself, and this all boomeranged on him. Now, that was a blunt exchange between those Trump allies about what has become clear mathematically, the futility of attacking all early voting in election month in general. Trump himself has softened his stance, changing his tone on mail-in ballots, as PBS put it, trying to bank those votes as one of the only ways he has a chance to stay competitive with Kamala Harris. Higher turnout often helps Democrats. But if most voting turns to these earlier options, that election month becomes a norm and both parties can use it, and it may be less of a distinction between the parties. The New York Times had a recent analysis for Democrats, Biden or Harris, on that point in the summer. High turnout with few hurdles to voting ought to be a good thing for democracy, period. But that implies that we all are on the same page about living and supporting a democracy. And if you've noticed, that ain't everybody anymore. Republicans know high turnout is dangerous for them, especially in national elections, as opposed to, say, local or off year. And they have this MAGA mentality that's pretty unwilling to change much of what they're offering. It may seem like the party has doomed itself to all these losses. And if we left it there, that's as far as we might go tonight, but I would be then skipping over the elephant in the room. When the Republican Party fails in these bids I've just mentioned to distort who can vote or even to vote early, and fails to score the Electoral College outcome that overrides the blue preference that you see of most voters, which actually happened twice. So 2 of the years of that blue column, where more people voted for the Democrat for the White House, we still had a Republican president. When neither of those tricks, ploys, legal or illegal, work, then they turn to the criminal plots to steal the election they lost. Trump's failed January 6th plot attempted to do that, the conviction sedition. Of course, we all lived through, and Republicans know it's been 20 years since voters cast more ballots for a Republican for president than a Democrat. So it's no surprise that the same candidate who lost and tried to steal last time is also prepping the same playbook now. That's the elephant in the room. We've been tracking those plots to steal the 2020 race. Some have been indicted and convicted. One was protected by the Supreme Court. Republicans are ready and see this as a ripe battlefield for even more aggressive efforts this cycle. They've launched some of these efforts even earlier, like their elector plots. Now, it's always concerning when politicians who have been defeated at the ballot box respond by trying to defeat democracy itself. So am I leading off tonight, this broadcast, only with gloom and doom amidst these statistics about early voting? Not exactly. You have to be aware and vigilant, but Donald Trump's effort failed last time. And those many efforts to decrease people voting have pretty much failed as well, partly because there is still a resilient majority in this country that backs democracy, and partly because of the larger shifts I'm documenting for you. More ways to vote, over more time, with more support for participation. At times like these, we are reminded of a truism. Politics is too important to be left to the politicians, especially the ones who openly admit they would steal your vote permanently if they got the chance. So that's why this is an important time to take stock of the election month that we are about to live through.
Right. On yesterday's show, we picked apart the false narrative emerging from several prominent voices that Donald Trump might be unfit for office, but they can't yet vote for Vice President Harris because she hasn't given enough details about her policies.
Well, I mean, you listen to Donald Trump on the policies.
And, you know, you should be.
And you're like going, is this Lincoln?
Right.
Like, is this like a,
he talked again yesterday.
King, a bit of Aristotle?
I'm sure that was helpful to you.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind when listening to some of what Trump had to say at his rally last night in Pennsylvania.
And Vladimir wanted it badly. That was the apple of his eye. Ukraine was the apple of his eye. But I said, don't do it. He would have never gone in, would have never happened. All these things would have never happened. But Ukraine now, I see Zelensky is here. I think Zelensky's the greatest salesman in history. Every time he comes into the country, he walks away with $60 billion. Billion! Walks in with $60 billion. He wants them to win this election so badly. Even before, as president-elect, if I win this election, the first thing I'm going to do is call up Zelensky and call up President Putin, and I'm going to say, you got to make a deal. This is crazy. What a horrible thing has happened just because, and it's our fault because it's a war that should have never been allowed to happen. We didn't have one terror attack during my administration. With all the terror attacks all over the world, we didn't have countries fighting each other. They wouldn't have done it without my permission. They would call me up to ask whether or not they could go to war with some other country. And I said, you can't do that. And if you do that, I'm going to put big, big taxes all over your country. Okay, we won't do it. And they'd call me up the next day. We've decided not to go to the war. We had no wars. These guys actually want these people in our country. It's not even believable. Working with left-wing nonprofits to inundate Pennsylvania communities, changing the character of small towns and villages all over our country and changing them forever. They will never be the same. They will never be. Do you think Springfield will ever be the same? I don't think. The fact is, and I'll say it now, you have to get them the hell out. You have to get them out. I'm sorry. To get them out. Can't have it. Can't have it. They've destroyed it. It's terrible. It's terrible to say, and it's a tough thing to do. What the damage that Sleepy Joe, you know, I'm tending to call him Sleepy Joe lately because I called him Crooked Joe. But now he's not like, is he, who's our president? We don't even have, do we have a president? Why doesn't he leave? Why doesn't he leave? Now think of it. Think of it. I call him Crooked Joe. That was very effective. It got him out of the race. I mean, guess what? No, we had a debate, and he didn't do too well in that debate. And they came to him and they said, you're down 21 points and you're going to lose. This can only happen to me. So I end up with somebody new. But here's the thing. All I have to do is expose her for what she is. She's a communist, okay? She's a communist. And this country is not ready for a communist and hopefully never will be, because that doesn't work. And remember this, and I just say this, if you look at Ukraine and Russia, but you know they say Russia. I stopped the Russian pipeline. It's called Nord Stream 2. Nobody ever heard of it until I came along. I stopped the biggest economic development job, the biggest job they've ever done. I stopped it cold. When Biden came in, he let them build, but he killed our Keystone pipeline, which we needed. He killed Keystone, so he killed, but think of it. And remember this about Russia. Under Bush, they took a lot. Under Biden and Barack Hussein Obama, has anyone ever heard of him, Barack Hussein, a lot of people say he's actually running the country right now. I don't think so. I don't think so. But some people say he's running our country. But I don't think it's Biden. Under Barack Hussein Obama, they took a lot, right? Under Biden, they're taking everything. They're taking everything.
Okay, in that, I guess what he would call the weave. There were so many disgusting, hateful things in there. It's hard to keep up. I know we're focused on foreign policy, but if I could just say his comments about Springfield. Yeah, Springfield has never been the same since Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and their violent rhetoric has wreaked chaos, havoc, fear, and upended the lives of countless people in that town. Ohio's Republican governor wrote an op-ed asking Donald Trump and J.D. Vance to stop, explaining the damage they have done to Springfield, and speaking up for the legal Haitian immigrants who live in Springfield, who add to the economy, who add to the society, who are good people. And it was very, very clear what is going on in Springfield is at the hands of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and that violent rhetoric.
And by the way, speaking of violent
and lies.
Speaking of rhetoric, I mean, she's a communist. We can never have a communist running this country. Yeah, the communist that is proposing $50,000 tax breaks for first-time small business owners. The communist that's proposing $25,000 tax cuts, tax incentives for first-time home buyers. The communist who is putting together tax incentives, private incentives to help spur 3 million new homes for construction over the next 4 years. Doesn't sound like a communist to me. You know why? Because it's not a communist. But it's interesting. Wall Street Journal editorial page. I talked about a column or two that I read over the weekend, and you did too. Very disturbing columns. But Wall Street Journal editorial page, again, been very responsible on Donald Trump's lies, the big lie, been very responsible talking about the lunacy that has taken over the Republican Party many times. It really has. And this morning, Ryan Ruth's political motives at the end said, we'll learn more as the case proceeds, but Ruth sounds like the type of person that could be triggered into murder by our ugly political debates. It's another reason for the country's leaders to avoid inflammatory end-of-days rhetoric against political opponents and about the consequences of losing a presidential election. Of course, Donald Trump said it's all the Democrats' fault. Dan Henninger said it's all the Democrats' fault. And then immediately thereafter, Donald Trump started talking about, because this is when he was attacking Democratic rhetoric. In the same Truth Social post, he says, because of this communist left rhetoric, the bullets are flying and it will only get worse. And he always accuses the left. He always accuses Kamala Harris, who now is being attacked for actually being in the center of being communist. But Willie, really quickly, we were going over the false equivalency of people saying, oh, well, you know, Donald Trump, he may be bad, but at least we know where he stands on policy. We don't know where Kamala stands, so how can we vote for her? We do know where she stands on a hell of a lot of policies. But here's where Donald Trump stands on policies. The people that said, yeah, but we know where he stands, and so we're going to vote for him. Zelensky, for Donald Trump, we just heard there, is the bad guy. Putin, a victim.
Yeah.
Vladimir Putin invades Ukraine. Who does Donald Trump say is at fault? The United States of America. He blames the city brightly shining on the hill for all the world to see. The city that has pushed back Russian aggression now since 1945. The country that has liberated much of Eastern Europe and is now trying to help liberate Ukraine. But Donald Trump blames America. He doesn't blame Vladimir Putin. He never has. And so for all these people that want to vote for him, are desperately seeking permission structure to vote for him, you will be voting for a man who says America is at blame for Vladimir Putin invading Ukraine. We made him do it. You go down the list. By the way, that sounds a lot like a certain historian who has been in the news lately and promoted, who said that in World War II, Hitler wasn't the villain. Churchill was the bad guy. And Hitler in the Holocaust, well, this person says it was just poor logistics, and they ended up deciding it was actually more humane to kill 6 million Jews than to let them slowly starve. Donald Trump talks about mass deportation, the villages that have been changed. It's like he thinks Shrek has come to the villages of Pennsylvania. Mass deportations, the crowd chanting, send them back. Yeah. The antithesis. If there are any conservatives left out there who actually remember Ronald Reagan, Reagan in his farewell speech talked about what small business owners in Springfield are talking about, how immigrants revive economies, how immigrants make America forever young. Ronald Reagan said it, his farewell speech. But Donald Trump in this speech is talking, and the crowd's chanting, I think, send them back, send them back. And then he's talking about massive tariffs. He's going to end wars by slapping massive tariffs on products that will destroy America's economy. If not destroy America's economy, let me restate that. It will crush working class Americans and middle class Americans. And then he brings up the debate against Joe Biden, but for some reason doesn't bring up the debate against Kamala Harris, doesn't bring up the fact that he dodged yet again her request, her demand for a second debate. He keeps dodging it, Willie. Why? Because he's horrible on the issues. And yet there's this flattening. Donald Trump will say that. And then you'll have people, and we'll get to Tom Nichols on this, but then we'll have people going, yeah, but what does Kamala Harris really think about quantitative easing? And yes, I understand that she's going to talk about $50,000 tax breaks for first-time small business owners and entrepreneurs and family businesses and people starting businesses on Main Street, USA. But what are the long-term tax ramifications about that? Well, Donald Trump just goes on stage and grunts and says nonsensical things.
Yeah, and on the policy about some of the people you're talking about, wealthy Republicans, wealthy independents, a lot of those guys we've seen out in Silicon Valley who've come out and said, well, I've got to go with Donald Trump here. You just laid it out. Are you for tariffs? Are you for record-breaking debt? Is the Dow closing a little too high? The Dow and the S&P closed at record highs again. This big September rally that's happening because of the Fed rate cut, all the things that are happening with this economy. So there's some policy for you on the other side, too, if you actually want to look at it. Perhaps they're using those as cover for something else, for some other reason they don't want to vote for Kamala Harris. Tom.
Should a woman be forced to carry a child to term after she has been the victim of incest or rape? We want women and young boys in the womb to have the right to life. I think two wrongs don't make a right.
This is one of the great tricks that I think the sexual revolution pulled on the American populace, which is this idea that, like, well, okay, these marriages were fundamentally, they were maybe even violent, but certainly they were unhappy, and so getting rid of them and making it easier for people to shift spouses like they change their underwear, that's going to make people happier in the long term.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too.
I also think, that there's something comparable, between abortion and slavery.
We're back with Claire, Minnie, and Sarah. Sarah, it strikes me, watching Vance in his own words, this unrepentant misogynist, that campaigns used to have opposition research teams that would have to dig up things. He's just out and proud. I mean, what is it? Who are they talking to? I mean, what are they going to do in a debate with that guy as their vice presidential candidate?
Okay, well, here's what I think they're trying to do. So I go back to this strategy of picking J.D. Vance was about running up the numbers with sort of secular men. All right, there's this sort of new, we could call it the manosphere, but it ranges from kind of Tucker Carlson to some of the guys at the Daily Wire, all the way over to some of these sort of Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate. Like, there's this massive web of influencers that are speaking to young men often, and also it dovetails with gaming culture, with kind of barstool sports culture. And so that is, and so both Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, if you look at the podcasts that they go on where they're sort of trying to appeal to people, it is in this manosphere. It is with these young men. And I think that's what's happening. But here's the thing that they didn't bank on. They thought that they were going to be running against Joe Biden. And so they thought that they would have really low enthusiasm among the Democratic coalition, and they'd be able to sort of run up the turnout numbers with men. And then, of course, the switch happened. And despite how angry Donald Trump is that he's no longer running against Joe Biden, and he continues to talk about Joe Biden like he is running against him, the fact is he's running against Kamala Harris. And Kamala Harris very quickly put that Democratic coalition back together, re-energized it, and now is fighting for these swing voters. And I talk to these swing voters all the time in focus groups. Let me tell you what they think about J.D. Vance. They think he's the worst. That childless cat lady stuff has broken through not just to women, but to men, too. And they think that this guy is creepy and weird. He's got extraordinarily low approval ratings. And every time he goes on one of these shows, he just digs the hole deeper because he is an unrepentant misogynist. And the other thing that he does is that, a lot of Donald Trump's misogyny, as we were talking about before, so much of that stuff is baked in just because it happened now such a long time ago. J.D. Vance has re-raised the salience of Donald Trump's misogyny. It's just sort of made it more of a surround sound issue, just like Bernie Moreno, just like all these other sort of candidates down ballot that are exposed for their misogyny. And it's creating a party-wide phenomenon, again, that this is a party that is hostile to women. And I think that's why you're seeing the numbers break the way that they are.
Claire, what are your, I hear exactly what you're saying about this manosphere, this sort of crypto bro mentality. It was their play, Claire, but I guess the reality is hopefully there aren't enough of them. What are your thoughts about this stretch where we're entering the final 42 days?
Well, I do think I remember back being on Meet the Press panel and discussing the fall of Roe v. Wade before the midterms in 2022. And there were some Republican folks on the panel that said, well, we've looked at polling and it really isn't polling as a top issue. And we don't really think it's going to be that big a deal. And I remember looking across the table at Yamiche, and she and I caught each other's eye and just went, oh, really? These guys don't understand that. And I don't think they truly understand. I don't think they respect women enough to get that running a campaign just to get the bros is not going to get them in the White House. And J.D. Vance is who he is. I mean, really, that quote, that clip you just played, everybody in America should listen to that clip. He actually says that women should stay in a violent marriage And he did a throwaway line, changing husbands like you, changing spouses like you change underwear. Well, getting away from a violent spouse is very hard and complicated and painful. And there are millions of women in America who have lived through that situation, either because of their parents or because of someone else in their family circle. A violent marriage is never anything that you should encourage a woman to stay in. And he did. And that's what he believes. He believes that. And he's the vice presidential nominee. So I think Tim Walz has a pretty simple job. He just needs to be the kind of dad that loves his daughters and respects women.
I think this idea of men, a referendum on men, American men, is hard to talk about and hard to cover, right? In the same way that women aren't a monolith, men aren't a monolith. But I think every gamer crypto bro who's sort of sucked into the information ecosystem is someone's son. They're someone's partner. They're a girl brother. I think the idea that the Republican Party is banking on the dehumanization, not just of women, but of men, that men can sit and nod, women should stay in marriages and not be able to change their underwear as, their husbands as quickly as they change underwear. I think we are selling men short to think that that isn't a message that should be seared into the mind of every prospective swing male voter. And I wonder, you've sort of cracked the code on making sure that abortion as a matter of life and death, as a reproductive healthcare and choice issue, as an IVF issue, that this is in front of all voters, not just women. How do you make sure in the next 40 days that men understand the full scale of acceptance of violence toward women, of the lethality of the abortion bans that affect, not just women, but any man, the woman who died in Georgia that ProPublica reported on, had a young son, a 6-year-old boy. This is not just women's crisis. This is a crisis for women and all the men who love them.
So I think the Harris campaign, we have great partners in the Harris campaign. I think the point Claire just made about Tim Walz. We've got Tim Walz out there. We've got Doug Emhoff out there. We just did an event in Tucson with Doug, with the second gentleman, I should say, and Men for Choice, which is an organization of young men whose whole slogan is like, get off the sidelines or in this fight. This is for us. This isn't just about our mothers or sisters or daughters. This is also our fundamental freedom to decide if, when, and how to have a family. So we need to have more skin in the game. We saw the really great work by our friends at White Dudes for Harris, appreciated at the recent event with Oprah. But look, we have a lot of great ways to reach men on this issue, and it's really important. But I do want to underscore something, going back again to Ohio. J.D. Vance won Ohio, right? He's a senator from Ohio, elected. A lot of the crazy stuff that's coming out right now, we knew a lot of it then. And Tim Ryan tried to use it to win. So and I'm an alumni of the 2016 presidential campaign. So look, there is a very dark underbelly of misogyny and racism in this country. What I want to say to viewers who are watching who care about Kamala Harris is do not sleep on that. Do not take it lightly. This gender gap, we could lose it. We got to fight like we're 10 points behind. We got to talk to all the people in our life, particularly the men. And we've got to fight that racist, misogynistic attack that's happening right now. Andrew Tate is famous for a reason. Jordan Peterson is famous for a reason. These folks have got a grip on a lot of young men in this society, and we have to fight with everything we've got.
Sarah, quickly, I do have this bus tour fantasy where, Mark Cuban, Tim McGraw, and Dick Cheney, get on a bus bound for Erie, PA. Does that make any sense?
I'm not sure about Dick Cheney, how he's doing health-wise, maybe for like a bus tour. But I do think that this idea of fighting for men's votes is really important. Like, I think one of the worst things that could happen in this election is that you end up in sort of a boys versus girls dichotomy around this election. And it can't just be deploying Tim Walz. Like, Kamala Harris, I think, needs to get out there. I think one of the things that we know is that the more people see of Kamala Harris, the more they like her. The more people see of Donald Trump, the less they like him. And so I think she's got to get out there and make her own pitch to men. She's going to be their president, too. And I think she's got a lot to offer. And I agree with you that we should give men more credit than maybe we are sometimes in the way that we're framing some of the, there is this manosphere, but I also think like when I listen to swing voting men, they're appalled by a lot of what Donald Trump says. I hear men all the time in focus groups hating the way that Donald Trump talks about women. And so I think that there can be this coalition. It doesn't work unless there are lots of men who are a part of it.
I want to bring in NBC senior political editor Mark Murray and former chief strategist for the Bush-Cheney 2004 campaign and senior MSNBC political analyst Matthew Dowd. Also with me here on set, New York Times reporter and MSNBC contributor Jeremy Peters. Welcome, all of you. So Ruben Gallego, Matthew, has voted in line with Joe Biden 100% of the time that he's been in Congress, according to the 538 tracker. So what's the attraction here for voters to cast a ballot for him and Trump?
Well, first, I hesitate to put too much credence in one poll that I actually think was wrong on both ends of this. The New York Times poll had Kamala Harris up 5 before the debate, and now it has her down 5 after the debate. My guess is the race is pretty much even. But putting that aside, here's what I have observed about Arizona for the last 3 or 4 elections. The Democratic ticket, all the people on the Democratic ticket are going to be within 2 or 3 points of each other. In 2022, every constitutional office that was voted on in 2022 on the Democratic side was within 2.5 points of each other, from the governor down to the Secretary of State, including the Attorney General and the Senate candidate. In 2020, when Joe Biden ran and Mark Kelly was on the ticket, it was less than 2 points separated Joe Biden and Mark Kelly. And so, yes, there is going to be some ticket splitting, and we will see some of that identification. But in the end, what happens normally in these states, and it happens in North Carolina, it happens in Arizona, it happens in a lot of states, what happens is that people consolidate around a ticket. And in Arizona, normally the Democrats are not separated by more than 2 or 3 points.
Yeah, certainly Ohio, my home state, one of them where Sherrod Brown certainly is hoping that all those folks who are going to vote for Donald Trump will keep him in the U.S. Senate. But let me talk to you, Jeremy, as we're looking at Donald Trump. He's at a campaign event in Savannah, Georgia right now, and we can show you that live picture. There he is. He's been speaking for usually about an hour at these things, if not longer. Jeremy, a former Republican Arizona state lawmaker who is now a political consultant, said this to your newspaper. Donald Trump creates his own weather, and he has a coalition supporting him like no other Republican nominee in our lifetime, perhaps ever in Arizona. And he points to the support in Arizona from young people, voters of color, people who typically would vote more Democratic, and that they say, even if he's breaking the mold, that doesn't necessarily mean that down ballot they're going to follow him along. So what do you make of that?
I think that's absolutely right. You see in Kari Lake, the Senate candidate this time, and last time I might add, who lost big time, not a very strong candidate. Voters saw her as too extreme. She's tried to tone it down this time. But once again, like you're seeing...
But there are lots of folks who would argue she's just a mini-me of Donald Trump.
Oh, that's exactly what she is.
And there are lots of people voting for Donald Trump who might vote for Ruben Gallego. So
yeah, and I think that's a real possibility.
The conundrum in people's minds, like, how does that happen?
And Ruben Gallego is not somebody easily portrayed as a far-left radical and extreme progressive as Trump and his allies have tried to portray Gallego. You know, he's pretty middle of the road, and he's an Arizona native, and he's really done a good job, I think, in building up his political brand as kind of an independent entity. I think in Kari Lake, you were always going to have trouble. She's an election denier. She's tried to kind of sand down some of those rougher edges, but people remember what she was like running as this extremist in 2022. I think there is no doubt, to answer your initial question about the Republican and Democratic coalitions kind of changing composition here, our polling shows that the typical undecided, uncommitted voter, kind of, with a soft preference for either candidate who's still persuadable, is more Latino, more black, and younger than the typical undecided, uncommitted voter. So there is a change happening here. How much that sticks between now and Election Day, we just don't know. But it would be a fallacy for any Democratic candidate to say that that's just not happening.
Yeah. All right. So, Mark, this was an additional part, what we were talking about, of the New York Times poll that came out over the weekend. We also just got a new part of our own NBC polling about registered voters who are ready to cast their ballots early. What's the conclusion that we're drawing from that? What are we finding out?
Yeah, Chris, this comes from our latest national NBC News poll, and we end up finding that half of registered voters, 51%, said that they plan to vote early in the 2024 presidential election, either in person or by mail. And that's compared to 45% of voters who want to wait until Election Day. And Chris, those margins aren't much different than what we ended up seeing back in 2020, even during the COVID pandemic. But what also is striking is the partisan differences here. And that also is unchanged from 2020, where overwhelmingly Democratic and Kamala Harris voters say that they're going to vote early. Overwhelmingly, Donald Trump and Republican voters say that they're going to vote on Election Day, despite a lot of Republican efforts to say, hey, no, let's be sure to vote early. Let's kind of have a concerted effort to be able to do that. And Chris, why this all matters is we get closer to Election Day, and when we are on Election Day, we're going to see different tranches of the vote come in. You know, the states that actually have their early votes tallied early, those might end up being more Democratic leaning as opposed to the Election Day totals. And so we're going to continue to monitor this, but this is one of the developments that we've seen in our poll, is that not a lot has changed when it comes to voter intention in 2020, since 2020, about how people plan to vote 2 months from now.
So all this early voting, Matthew, and Donald Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance, have some mixed messaging about that. I'm going to play you a little bit of that.
We got to get out and vote. You can start right away. You know that, right? Now we have this stupid stuff where you can vote 45 days early. I wonder what the hell happens during that 45.
Look, I don't love that this country has gone from election day to election season, but it is what it is, and we got to play by the rules that are set. So use early voting, use mail-in voting, use voting on Election Day, whatever you can to get out there and make sure that if 100 people plan to vote for Donald Trump, 100 people actually get out there and do vote for Donald Trump.
So let me see if I can interpret that for you, Matthew, because I know you don't speak politics. I'm pretty sure what they both said were, I don't like it, I don't trust it, but vote early. How do you read it?
I think that's a pretty accurate read. I mean, it's like telling somebody. It was
very complicated, but I got there.
Go down and buy a used car from this guy up the street, but you can't trust the guy. The car's going to probably break down, and you're probably not going to be satisfied. But go ahead and go buy it from that guy. That's actually what they're saying. To me, they have been off message on this ever since 2020. It hurt them in 2022 on turnout across the board in state after state after state. It's hurt them in special elections. They do not have a message because I think fundamentally their message is we don't want everybody to vote. That's fundamentally at the basis of it. We don't want to make it easy for people to vote and have a huge turnout in this election. That's what they're afraid of. And Donald Trump has all but said that.
So he's all but said that, Jeremy. But what's the alternative at this point? That's the other part of this messaging, right? Like, OK, this is the world we're in. But it is sort of hard to see when you've been pounding not just for weeks and months, but years, as Donald Trump has, distrust this, that suddenly you're asking people to trust it and they're going to have a change of heart.
And Trump, as we've seen, can barely bring himself to say that people should vote by mail. I mean, it's something that gave people at the Republican National Committee last cycle, heart palpitations. They knew that this was a good thing for people to go out and vote early. And Trump just couldn't get his head around the idea that that was somehow going to steal the race from him. And I think he's still there. And he has this way of sabotaging himself. Look what he did in Georgia in 2020, right? He had two Republicans on the ballot running at the same time for the Senate. And because he thought that he was cheated of victory in the Arizona presidential electoral count, he basically told his supporters, you don't need to worry about this race. I lost, so it's not worth voting anymore. And I don't think there's any reason that we have to believe he's changed.